Mr. Wilson. I don't have to take that kind of talk from anyone.
That's right, you don't. How about going outside and trying to kick me around?
I'm not supposed to fight with the guests, Mr. Wilson.
I'm not a guest tonight, you yellow bastard. I happen to be an intruder.
Hello, and welcome to The Good, the Pod, the Ugly, a film podcast where we pair movies to gather a better understanding of the filmographies of notable directors and sometimes actors, usually with just one artist per season. Sometimes we got guests on. I'm your co-host, Thomas.
I'm your other co-host, Ken.
You may know us from some of our other podcasts, including Midwives, where we complain and praise our average spouses. Or Patty Highsmithy, where host Kenneth gets stoned and reads the Ripley series, starting with the talented Mr. Ripley, over the sounds of Tommy using a blast furnace, hammer, and anvil, and singing Irish chanties.
Oh my God!
What I'm seeing, I think a really good podcast idea for you all to explore is a merging of midwives and Polaroids, and it's a podcast similar to like the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. Uh-huh. It's the midwives of the roiding polar dudes, just bitching about that life, you know. The struggles of being married to a roid-addicted man and living in the polar region.
Look for that on all podcast platforms coming soon. But on this podcast, we do a deep dive on the creatives, and we pair a couple films. We do their backgrounds. We add our insights. We've done a lot of directors and not done them, but we've covered a lot of actors and directors. I think we mentioned John Frankenheimer. We did 4 of his films for a 4x4, and his film Seconds influenced last week's film Memento. But which film and who are we covering this season, Thomas?
Well, this season, Nolan Void, we're covering Christopher Nolan.
Sir?
And, yes, you could call me sir. And last week, we covered his second major release film, which would have been Memento. And this week, we continue our temporal pincer movement with...
Oh my God.
Tenet.
The actual where we got the name.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for like 4-5 seasons, we didn't know how to describe how we covered the Clint Eastwood movies. And then Tenet came out, and we were like, fuck, temporal pincer movement. Thanks, Sir Chris.
And this week, you've already heard him on mic. We're joined again by the protagonist.
Yes.
Thank you for coming.
John Ryan Washington has joined us. Denzel's other son.
Yes. Oh, could I be so lucky? Jesus.
How's it going, Ryan?
It's great. Do you think Denzel ever says, "my man," to John David? Like John David calls him up and then it's like, "I got Tenet, Dad," and Denzel's like, "my man."
Yes.
Oh, I would live and die to hear Denzel say "my man" to me that way.
Would you die happy?
I would, yeah.
All right, make a wish if any board members are listening. Ryan, I still think you might make the cutoff age, but that's Ryan's wish.
I'd be happy enough to die that way to take the whole world with me, Seder style.
So, Tenet, you all?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the full name of the movie.
Tenet, y'all.
It's the cowboy version of the same movie. Lasso's going in reverse.
Oh, if he had done this as a Western, then that would automatically add 2 stars to my letterbox rating.
12 stars. I saw this the first time with you, Ryan, I think, 70 millimeter.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Wow. Where did you see it? At the Hollywood?
Yeah.
Oh, how'd that look?
Amazing.
It was great. It was very overwhelming for me. Since Dunkirk, actually, his movies have become so assaultive on first watch. And that's not necessarily a criticism, but that it's like a really overwhelming experience for me to process, you know?
Yeah, narratively, I kind of see Dunkirk and this movie Tenet as of a piece of maybe Nolan going a little further abstract than he's gone narratively before as far as his storytelling. But we can get into that.
Yeah, this is such an abstraction. I mean, at least with Dunkirk, you have a story that you know already to hold on to, but this is such a, this is even just removing that. Yeah. It's a very impressive feat of ambition. Whether it goes beyond that, we'll see. We'll see.
And Ken, you'd watched this, I assume, prior to us recording?
Yes, I have seen it now twice. I think it's the only Nolan. It's the only Nolan film since Following that I have not seen on the big screen. Coincidentally, it played last night at OMSI in their science fiction film festival, and I didn't get a chance to see it.
Is it playing again on Tuesday, maybe?
It is, but I watched it with the subtitles on, and that was my primary reason, because there's some... It made a big difference.
Yeah. This is my... Since this movie came out, I've had a long grappling with it, and I've seen it either 4 or 5 times now, trying mostly to figure out what I think about it.
And Thomas, how many subsequent times did you see it after that first 70 millimeter screening?
I only once, only again for this podcast. I like the film a lot. It's at 2.5 hours for the film that it is a little bit of an ask, but I guess we'll wait to get to the reactions. For a little bit more on just my thoughts on the film.
Yeah, podcast over.
This film was shot in 96 days. That's a fact.
Thomas, so you said you were struggling with writing a synopsis for this. And if anybody listened last week, I didn't even bother writing a synopsis for Memento. It fucking sucked.
No, Memento was good. I
think I can synopsize this.
No, my synopsis for Memento sucked. Excuse me while I cough. I'll edit it out. Fucking pistachios.
That's all right. I can try and deliver a synopsis if you guys want.
I was been looking forward to Thomas's all week.
Well, oh, okay. Then let's definitely do that.
First, so this is the conundrum that I got into, because at first I was like, well, I could just do something fun like we always do, right? But I really just wanted to start off with to understand time travel, you must first understand time travel, and just make it as opaque as possible. But I actually ended up writing something which is definitely longer than 1 minute. Reason that we started doing 1 minute to give our listener a peek behind some of our thoughts is that we tended to do a plot synopsis early on, and people just went on and on.
Yeah.
Like a blow by blow of the film, where the podcast was almost the same runtime. So we wanted to avoid that by doing a 1 minute synopsis. But I think with this film, maybe we lose a little bit. So let me do some table dressing and refresh us, okay?
I think we've loosened up this season. As long as it's under an hour and a half, it's a good synopsis.
All right. Well, I'm going to start a clock then. Because we open with musicians tuning their instruments in a crowded opera house that will soon be overrun by terrorists in what might be a false flag operation, because a covert team in a van who's already present before the attack joins the police response using badges selected from multiple options of insignias to blend in. And once in, they immediately break away from the police to save or / kidnap a person as knockout gas is being deployed by the police. So we're following one main person, played by John David Washington, who gets his guy, but then he returns to get rid of bombs that were set by the terrorists during the action. And when he's doing so, he's saved by someone not from his crew or the police, nor the terrorists, but has a noticeable red charm, like what you would have for identifying your airport luggage on the turnstile. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, when he gets back to the van, Washington's character appears to have been made. And so he's getting his teeth pulled out at a train depot and is unable to take a cyanide pill. But fortunately, his buddy slips him his cyanide pill, and protagonist wakes up with new teeth, said, not shown, and he has passed a test because the pill was not a real pill. Instead, he's now considered dead and can pursue a deeper, darker topic, something only known as Tenet, and with which, when you say it, you need to interlock your fingers, like synergy, right?
Mhm.
Washington, we'll call him protagonist, as the movie does the same, is picked up in disguise as an offshore wind turbine mechanic, and sporting this high-vis vest of a worker, goes back on shore to meet with the scientist played by Clemence Poissy, who reveals the Tenet team is discovering time-reversed radioactive artifacts from some major event in the future. She shows them that to pick up a time-reversed bullet, you have to drop it. Because of arms dealing or something, protagonist needs to meet his handler, Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, who knows all about the protagonist, including that he prefers cola over soda water. They slingshot themselves onto an impenetrable building to meet with an arms dealer played by actress Dimple Kapadia, I think is how you say her name, who informs protagonist the real baddie is a Russian oligarch who's getting information from the future. Protagonist then travels to brunch with Michael Caine, who plays Michael Caine, to inform protagonist that his entry point into the oligarch is going to be the oligarch's wife, known as Catherine Cat Barden, who's played by Elizabeth Debicki, who has an art scam, who's 6'3", yeah, who has a art scam that she's being blackmailed for by her husband. So she meets the protagonist for dinner, and her husband, again unseen, isn't happy about this and sends his goons to take the protagonist out in the kitchen, rough him up. But instead, they get the business end of a cheese grater from protagonist. So now we're like at minute 40, and it's a 2.5-hour movie. To get Kat to help him, protagonist gets into art heist, an art heist set piece with a crashing plane and more strangers who shouldn't be around and fight backwards, but their identities aren't known because they're wearing masks, because the heist area is an airport free zone that uses gas for fire suppression. Debicki tries to murder her husband, who's revealed to be Kenneth Branagh, on a fast-moving sailboat, and protagonist gets caught snooping and has to steal what he thinks is plutonium, but is something else. Before, at 1 hour and 24 minutes, we get the phrase temporal pincer movement from future soldiers, and our hero goes through a turnstile into the past to prevent the stealing of the nuclear material they just lost, but fails to prevent that, and Debicki's character is shot by a reverse bullet that they then needed to reverse to keep her alive through a turnstile before returning her to the present time. And the turnstile they need to go to is at the airport we just saw, so we play the same scene, but the heroes are the people in the masks this time. And okay, so then Branagh has a fitness tracker, and there's radioactive material from the heist is really the final piece from a doomsday future device that's being set off, not in the future now, but maybe back in the past, as Branagh has the fitness tracker tied to it through a dead man switch. So protagonist and a whole army with a turnstile technology on a boat, and Patterson's Neil, they get divided into two teams, one going forward and one going backwards, and they raid the facility with the doomsday device, while Kat, the Debicki's character, is on the yacht with Branagh to keep him from suiciding, although she really wants to kill him. Wow. Okay, so Neil swaps sides between forward and backward soldiers during the attack to save the day. And after saving the day, because it hasn't happened yet in one timeline, maybe, I don't know, he goes back to the past and what's likely his death, but the protagonist doesn't tell him this information. He keeps it compartmentalized. But before he leaves, Neil lets protagonist know that they will be friends in the future because that's where he's from. And protagonist notices the red doohickey that we saw from the opera scene. The movie continues after this because there was a cell phone that the protagonist gave to the Debicki character, and he appears to have masterminded the timey-wimey things of this movie because he saves Kat from being killed by the arms dealer from earlier by killing her instead. And everything's fine, and there are no repercussions, I think.
All right, drop that microphone, Thomas. That
was great. That was great.
Until doing the plot synopsis, I didn't realize every time you see them from the future in the present time, there's always an excuse to have gas. And I'm not talking about the pistachios you're eating, Ken. I'm talking about in the opera scene, there's gas there to knock out the terrorists. Mm-hmm. In the art heist scene, there's gas there to suppress fires. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense that the person that you're encountering has a gas mask on, because the gas mask itself is the way that you tell whether somebody's going from the future or the past. Because for some reason, if you're reversed or inverted, you can't breathe the air.
Yes,
Yeah.
your lungs can't process the air.
But wouldn't you just be able to exhale? I don't know.
No,
No?
no.
Okay. But
Your lungs are you are inhaling, and your lungs are creating more carbon dioxide instead of more oxygen.
Okay, that makes sense.
Everything scientifically that goes on in the world is reversed. That's why he gets
you can pick up a bullet by using your mind.
hypothermia. He gets hypothermia from the fire in the car.
Which is another question I had. But, this is a movie that I watched asking questions. This is a movie I watch just like cheering.
Yeah, you're not supposed to ask the question. That's interesting. Well, he says you're not supposed to ask the questions, right? With the intuition line. But
yeah,
to your point, Thomas, I don't know if this movie is so caught up in its world building that it just invites you to ask questions the whole time. It's not like a Lynch movie or something, like in Lost Highway, there is definitely a supernatural thing happening, but he never talks about it. None of the characters ever try and explain the particulars. And so you are just feeling it. But in this movie, he's like, don't think about it, just feel it. And now I'm going to spend 2 hours telling you every detail that you're not supposed to think about. It's a fascinating approach.
I think it's more of a magic trick than that. I don't think he's trying. I don't think I mean, unlike Inception, where it feels like he's perhaps trying to plot it out too much. I think he hand waves a lot. And I think that part of that is by saying things like the Washington character asking, like, what about the grandfather paradox? Like, so he's bringing up things that we shouldn't think about, or might be thinking about ourselves as the audience, to make us feel smart, and then being told not to worry about those things.
No. Well, no, I don't mean no. I think that's definitely a valid. Well, because I think what you're saying is totally a valid interpretation. I'm not saying that you're incorrect. I think the grandfather, going back to the changing the past to change the future thing, I think the grandfather paradox is like the heart of the movie. He's saying, because what the people in the future believe is that time is completely localized, so you can destroy the past and it will have zero ramification on your life. You could kill your grandfather and everything's hunky-dory. And that is actually the basis for this larger theoretical framework that I think he's working on in these 10 films. But he does hand wave it in the movie too. I think your interpretation of this isolated film is 100% correct, which is why I said no. And then I immediately went back, because you're certainly not wrong, but I do think it's very important in his mind anyways.
Wow.
Whew.
Yeah. The overarching threat is an incursion from the future that's going to invert the whole planet and kill everybody. So all the people from the future are then going to be living essentially backwards because of global climate change.
And they will flourish because they destroyed their past. It's like, it's not only that they can do it, it's like central to their continued existence, and presumably their lives will get better after doing so.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's part of so this movie has like the biggest threat ever, right? Which is like coming undone. It's blowing up the atmosphere, right? And like Oppenheimer, it's like as big as you can go, like unmaking existence. Except what you just said there doesn't really, like, none of it quite makes sense. And it doesn't matter. Oh, I feel like it's more like the suitcase or the briefcase in Pulp Fiction than it is like actual completely thought out understanding of things, because either the future gets wiped out whenever you destroy the past, which is or it can't happen, which is the grandfather paradox.
No, but see, there's no, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go on. Yeah.
Okay. So if I think the future is having either revenge on the past by destroying it, which it can't do because then the future won't exist and it won't have ever happened, or it is trying to set up a different future by destroying themselves. I don't think you can have it both ways.
No, but if,
or
if
you
they are
reverse time, and whatever's
Yeah.
happening at the very end goes back and overwrites what's happened in the beginning.
So this, according to these Y theory guys. So again, this is not my. I didn't put this all together. I am not familiar enough with Freud and Heidegger and some of the other people that these dudes reference when they present their Nolan theory. And I urge people to go listen to their pod about Tenet, because it's radically different than other pods. It's just about this philosophy. But there is a philosophical line of thinking that says that this idea that you can change the future by changing the past is, they argue that the physics work, that you could go back and do this, and that the underlying premise, which I agree is both works primarily in the movie if you think of it as the Pulp Fiction suitcase, but I do believe that that everything you see in the film, Nolan has thought through, and all functions this idea that the grandfather paradox is not true, and that in fact time is local, because that's also part of Interstellar, which we'll talk about when we get there. But this idea that time only matters in your immediate environment is like a central idea of quantum physics and certain kinds of philosophy. Sorry to derail everything once more, but
Nolan loves working with physicists. I mean, what was it? Is it Kip Thorne? Is that the guy that was an advisor both on Interstellar and this film?
Yeah.
And there is a point in the movie where I gave up. I think both times I watched it, I gave up. I thought I had a handle on what was going on. And then I think it's right around the amazing car chase. And then they're back at a turnstile proving room, and DeBecky gets shot with an inverse bullet. And from that point on, I'm like, no clue how this works. But I felt that Nolan at least knew how it worked. And what I was seeing was so spectacular, I really didn't care by that point. It was just
okay.
Yeah, I just think it looked totally badass, and I just went with it.
So that, if I might, then that leads into the question that I was texting you guys about yesterday. So there's this trend, like in recent movies, with Inglourious Bastards and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where presumably if you didn't know who Hitler was, or you didn't know who Charlie Manson was, then you'd go into those movies and you'd watch those movies, and they wouldn't really make any sense because they require that you bringing that knowledge to the movie. And similar thing happens, I think, with the Fabelmans. If you don't know that Spielberg goes on to be this great director, and that's the main character of this film, of the Fabelmans, with Tenet, and because you guys saw it once and then there was a long delay and you saw it again. So I want to ask, I think with this movie, he is presuming that you're going to see it twice, and you're going to see it twice almost in succession. And if you watch it that way, then the story actually makes sense. If it's very fresh in your mind and you go in and watch it again, then it's a complete movie with a beginning and end, and it tells a story that is comprehensible. It still gets timey-wimey, but you can grasp it. And for me, the first time I saw it, I felt like I didn't know what to think, because I hadn't seen it twice. And then when I saw it a second and third time, I started to get my arms around it and really enjoy it. But for you, Ken, that wasn't the case. You were able to enjoy it the first time and the second time. And Thomas, were you the same way?
Yeah, I loved it the first time when we watched it. And I'm not sure, I mean, maybe can you recall what was more obvious to you by watching it back to back than watching it the first time? Because I don't feel like I was lost at any point. I just think the actual physics of what happened are contradictory.
So
okay,
I understood. I understood the plot. The James Bond portion of the plot, that the timey-wimey stuff didn't matter. What I was talking about is the actual physics of the time travel. I lost track of as soon as they started those proving rooms, with Branagh and
Turnstiles.
Dubecki. Yeah. It was at that point where the actual physics of the technology stopped making sense to me. And especially with the temporal pincer movement at the end, which is amazing to watch and a beautiful cinematic experience. I had no clue how it was working, even though I understood, well, they're going, they're going for a MacGuffin. They have to stop something from happening. Pretty simple on one level.
Fascinating. Yeah. So for me, the first time, I enjoyed it up to the experiment when he meets a scientist and shoots the wall. And then it just became increasingly, I've never seen a blockbuster where I didn't understand what was happening. I'm pretty good at following like convoluted spy movies and even that kind of thing. But this movie just became increasingly monolithic and impenetrable to me. And I enjoyed the car scene. I'm not really a fan of just like war action style scenes in general. So the end was just kind of left me cold. So the first time was really frustrating because there was a lot that I enjoyed on a technical level. And there were many scenes that were vicariously thrilling, but I didn't have any idea what I just saw. And it wasn't, I literally could not have told you what I thought of the movie. So I did not have that.
So yeah, I think what's interesting about the film,
first time.
I think what you're expressing is something I find very fascinating, and I respect a lot about the film, which is the film moves at a clip, which is would be hard to keep track of if you weren't focused on it, and that's just for the spy portion of the film. In addition to that, then you also have to contend with the timey-wimey stuff, right? And so I think that you have two things. Like if you just had a movie that was the timey-wimey stuff, like Primer, hard to keep track of, right? But then you have that almost duplicated effort of also trying to keep track of the plot. Because really the plot it seems extremely simple, and I think it is extremely simple, but it's just a matter, but he doesn't really give you much to go on. Like, oh, why are they robbing an art thing again? Why are they at the airport? Oh, that's right. It has the Goya in it. Okay. But it's all but almost all that's MacGuffins to have an amazing set piece as I am experiencing it.
Yeah, I mean, when you break it down like your brilliant synopsis, Thomas, it is kind of silly. All right, well, we got to steal this Goya from this impenetrable vault at an airport. Let's crash a giant plane into the vault
with gold. It has gold bars in it.
Yeah, let's dump out a bunch of gold bars so everybody's distracted, and just to get on the good side of Kenneth Branagh's wife. It's kind of silly, but when you're watching it, it's like it's so fucking cool because it's like so many series of little missions that they have, and when you're watching it, it's amazing. And that first scene where it's the plane, and it was all practical. There's no green screens in this movie. They crashed a giant plane into a building for the movie, and it looks great. And you don't really ask yourself, wait, they're just doing that to get one drawing because
a counterfeit drawing
because it's fake, and Kenneth Branagh is blackmailing her with it because she authenticated it because that's her job. And I do have to say, for Michael Caine, Sir Michael Caine, I think this is his last performance before he retired.
Yeah.
He should be renamed Sir Infodump, given the sheer amount of exposition in his one scene. He just everything that took Thomas 5 minutes to explain. Michael Caine does it in this huge block of text about Branagh and Dubecki. And it is one of the worst bits of writing I think I've seen from these Nolan movies that we've been watching. But also Michael Caine saying it, so you don't really notice.
Speaking of writing, I think this is the movie where I feel, besides the movie we talked about a couple weeks ago, I think this is the movie where I feel I think it's very clumsily written, particularly the Dubecki Branagh parts. It's really hard for me to get involved in that relationship. And it seems central to the emotional thrust of the movie that you buy in to do with Dubecki and her son, and I just can't with that the way it's written and stuff.
And I actually 100% agree with that sentiment, Ryan. And I think part of it is Dubecki and Washington have zero chemistry. Pattinson and
too.
Washington, holy shit! I would watch a whole movie of those guys. They're like George Clooney and Brad Pitt in Ocean's 11. They're so great together. You just want to see them go pull scams and heists for 2.5 hours.
Yeah. You want to see the movie that's suggested at the end of this movie.
Yes.
So I don't know if I like that Washington and Dubecki don't have chemistry, and that it's just he's treating her a little bit like the bombs in the theater. I don't think that they're supposed to be romantic, despite Bronnell's character's obsession otherwise. The thing that tripped me up this last time watching it, and I appreciate it that they don't, that it's not a Bond movie where he has sex with her. But it is a little bit of I guess Nolan gets knocked for having the dead wife or the dying wife thing. It is a little bit of that. I think that she holds her own on the yacht, and it's an interesting scene at the very end of wanting to kill him, but holding off, but then killing him. But here's something that hit me this time watching it. It's not a timey-wimey thing. It was just why it's a plot mechanism. Why in the plot for these characters is it learned so late that he has terminal cancer? The Bronnell character has terminal cancer, and why would she act the way that she's acting if she knew that he was going to be dead soon and didn't know about the bomb? Right? Like she'd be like, "Oh, he's got something on me, but he's dead in like 6 months. You can't cure this cancer."
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
That is fairly clumsy.
It just seems like it's there for the plot, which is fine. But one of the things I love is how cold he seems before that, where he's just like looking at his heart rate. Like I didn't know that I forgot that he had the dead man switch this time, and I was just like, oh, isn't that great? Like, oh, you barely raised my pulse, and I beat the shit out of you. Or also the guy checking his phone during the interrogation scene at the train yards. There's something like really sinister about like somebody like, I don't know, looking at TikTok while somebody else is pulling your teeth out.
Yeah. The casual cruelty in this movie is interesting. I think Dubecki is amazing in that scene on the boat. I mean, she's a really great actress, and I think that really helps the film, particularly in that scene.
One thing that I noticed this time is that there's some terrible editing in the restaurant scene between Washington and her before the thugs show up. Yeah. You watch it again, she's holding a glass and not holding it, depending on like she's doing some timey-wimey stuff or like magic tricks with the glass in her hand. And I think it's part of that just using one camera problem, because they have like 4 setups in it as far as I can tell, of like a tracking shot that's zooming in and then like stationary over their shoulders. And they just had, I guess the editor just had to edit around for the best takes. But it's a strange thing to watch in a film that feels like, okay. So when I don't know if you saw the commentary, Ken, on it, but they had to shoot the fight scene in the airport 4 different times, right? With Washington. Yep. Once forward in a suit, once backwards in a suit, once wearing the mask forward, and once backwards wearing the mask. He had to memorize how to fight backwards, both as himself in a suit and as his counterpart.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then they also designed, a little bit like last time we talked about, they never had a black and white IMAX camera before shooting IMAX, or they never had the film for it. They had to design an IMAX camera that ran backwards, so that they could, because they use different tricks depending on what they were doing, like so they could cut back and forth and it wouldn't be obvious. Yeah. And so sometimes they will show like have somebody running backwards and shoot it backwards to have them running forward, so everything just feels a little bit off or on. But so they had to create a camera to be able to do a really cool, simple, like the simplest and the coolest thing you could do with film, really, right? Is like run it backwards.
Yeah. And it's such a fascinating so much of the trickery of this movie cinematically is when it works right, like basically undetectable. Like it really does. You can't tell when things are happening if you're watching film running forwards or backwards a lot of the time. And it's fascinating that he would put so much time and effort into such a subtle and nuanced trick in a way, you know.
When you look at we Thomas and I both watched the making of on the Blu-ray. How much effort went into thinking out every little thing for the timey-wimey stuff and the stunt coordinators, and watching stunt coordinators practice going backwards and then also practice going forwards, but as people who are inverted, so they run kind of weird.
Yeah.
An amazing amount of training these technical people did. And then also this was most of this was shot on IMAX and then 65 millimeter. They used like 1.5 million feet of IMAX film.
Wow.
And then if you think about the rigs they had to do for the catamarans, because you know it's a huge camera. They used 65 millimeter for most of the dialogue scenes, and then IMAX for all of the big stuff.
Well, also, like for the car, they reversed the drivetrain so it could drive backwards like it's forward. But the other cool thing was, I think I sent you a screenshot of this. Brano had to phonetically write out how to speak with a Russian accent backwards. So he had to walk backwards, perform backwards, and speak with a Russian accent backwards.
And then that's the proving room scene where he's on the other side with Dubecki threatening. And that's a scene that really broke my brain of him talking forward and then talking backwards, and then just how the timelines matched up. That was when my brain broke, and I decided, I'm just going to enjoy the rest of this movie because I have no idea what's fucking going on.
My brain broke when he almost dies of hypothermia from the explosion.
The car exploding.
And I was like, it doesn't matter because the car didn't go through reverse time. It doesn't matter.
I know. It gets so confusing.
Why does he shoot his inverted self when it was inverted? He knows it's him.
Uh-huh.
So why does he? It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Because it already happened.
Yes.
So there is one note that I made that I know Christopher Nolan, first of all, loves spy movies. He's always talked about the James Bond movies. And this is kind of like a James Bond movie instead of space like Moonraker. It's kind of timey-wimey stuff. You could almost see that in a lot of the structure, particularly Branagh, his wife, and then the assault at the end feels very much of a late Sean Connery era James Bond with all the military guys going into volcanoes and whatever.
Yeah. The catamaran racing scene, that's like, it doesn't really have anything to do with the story. It's just like a set piece that's plopped in there to see cool boats go fast.
And you could almost imagine some of those exotic locales opening with like the John Barry lush strings of the James Bond movies when they're introduced to locales.
I wanted to ask you guys about that because to me, this, particularly the first two times, it just read like it's just a James Bond movie, and I don't say just in a to lessen the movie, but like you could literally just put the newest James Bond in the John David Washington role and write a love scene. And what would that? So I guess my question is, do you think that this would have worked as a Bond movie and bringing in this hyper scientific, the timey-wimey stuff, introducing a bold, maybe this comes out instead of Casino Royale, as a reinvention of the Bond mystique and how that would play. Do you think this would work as a way to relaunch the Bond franchise?
Well, I mean, there's enough differences as the movie that he made, but at it, him wanting to make a spy movie and purposely not watching any spy movies while he was in the creative process because he didn't want it. He wanted to base on the feel he got from remembering those films. Like,
right.
That's
interesting.
I don't think it works because then the Patterson character doesn't make any sense in the Bond universe unless we're starting off and there is no Bond that you've seen in the past. and he's been on these other Bond missions, and this is the ultimate Bond mission that's going to end all Bond missions. I don't know.
I think this
his
is
CIA
setting up
buddy.
a time war spin-off, like the Bond franchise becomes about the time war. And you have Bond and his sidekick running through time. You know, it's a bold, it would definitely be a lot different than Bond. And I just love the idea of thinking like, if such a formulaic franchise could withstand going in this totally other direction for 4 or 5 films.
So another thing it reminded me of was Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, based on those
yes.
based on the Destroyer novels, you know, which is a whole series of novels that were a little more comedic than Nolan's ever been. But those men's action books that would sometimes be slightly science fiction based from the 70s and 80s, it reminded me of that. And it also reminded me of like the mid 2000s when Image Comics was coming out with all these really high concept, cool books. And it would be like a Grant Morrison or a Jonathan Hickman who would come in and say, well, this is kind of like James Bond. And they rub their hands together, but with a twist. And the twist is kind of the thing that gets you through like, this feels like 12 issues of one of those books from the early 2000s. And you can see it going on from here, right? It certainly ends in a way where it seems like this is just the beginning.
Well, and that's another thought experiment. And it's probably, I mean, Inception, a lot of his other movies are open to sequels that never happen. But is it possible that one reason why Nolan was so aggressively anti-COVID restrictions in getting his movie out there is because he wanted to launch a franchise? Is there a Tenet 2 that we'll never see because of the pandemic?
I mean, my first thought was like, why would he ever do a sequel? And then I forgot that he has Batmans.
Yeah.
Which might explain why he'll never do one again.
It could be, yeah. And Inception similarly ends in a way where, like, you know, a different director could be, you could see a world where Nolan is like a Spielberg-like producer and we're watching Inception 5, you know, directed by...
Come on.
Michael Bay?
Come on, right?
No. Who's the guy? Trevor. Who is the guy who's supposed to do? No. Who is the guy who's supposed to do Star Trek Part 9?
Quentin Tarantino.
No. Fuck.
Yes.
Oh.
Fuck was about to direct Star Trek 9.
Yeah.
You're right.
He had the screenplay. He made the Jurassic World movie. He was riding high, and then all of a sudden his whole career got tanked. Anyway, cut all this out.
Really?
Okay, I will. So, for back to Tenet, between this and Memento, I think as far as the ambition behind Tenet is so huge, technically and logistically, and even narratively, to make all that stuff fit as well as it either does or doesn't. We're a long way from Memento, which we talked last week, is like one of his most human movies, where you kind of relate to the people on a human level, and we don't get a lot of that in Nolan's subsequent work. Maybe in Oppenheimer, but definitely not in Tenet.
Yeah, see, this is something interesting that I'm so excited to see the rest of the movies, because I was watching Memento and thinking, like, when did he get this rep for being cold? Because I find, up until Dunkirk, really, I find a lot of his films to be very emotionally engaging for me. Although Tenet and Oppenheimer neither were, but so it'll be interesting to go back and see when that started.
Well, I see what you're saying. And I think maybe because the movies get bigger, I think that his emotional stuff feels like it's in all caps maybe later in his career. And Memento is a quieter sense of relating to the characters than we get with Bruce Wayne seeing Michael Caine at the end of The Dark Knight Rises. Spoiler.
Yes.
Which is also an emotional moment, but this is like sung at the top of your lungs, and Memento's maybe a little bit acoustic guitar comparatively.
That's a good way of putting it. riffing on the Memento Tenet relationship. So if you guys were to take the change the past to change the future idea as being, central to both these films, then the reading for Tenet that I think is at least very provocative, is that the future guys are right and the protagonist is the bad guy, because the future people have gotten to a point where the only way to continue the survival of the species is to try this crazy ass gambit and invert the flow of time. Which, the people in our time in Tenet, nobody knows if it's possible, but there are many people, including Pattinson, who think it very well could be. That makes the protagonist like he runs an organization that's dedicated to the destruction of our species. And how does that make? Do you guys have any reaction to that?
I mean, I think there's a question there of whether or not there's free will, if the protagonist is able to exert free will or not. Because here's the difficult part to answer that question, as I understand it. And this gets a little bit into primer territory. Like, where's Patterson during the time that he's supposed to be meeting Washington? Because that's the future him coming back to meet him, probably. That's how he knows that he likes Coke versus
soda.
Yeah. So is he always from the future, or is he existing? He had to exist sometime during this timeline, most likely, because it doesn't seem like the future is that far from the future in the future that he could be born and come all the way back, right?
But he has been inverted for like 10 years or something.
So
is my understanding. I'm sorry.
If he's been inverted for 10 years, he's over 10 years old. So he's also living on Earth during this time period going forward. And he doesn't have a mask on when he meets him. So I'm thinking that he's probably not inverted. Like, he came back and then he went forward during this time period, but it doesn't matter. The question is, do the people from the future who have the technology think that the Brownell character is going to use the bomb or not? And if they know that he's not going to use the bomb, do they send it back in time so that they will have the bomb in the future? And if they have the bomb in the future because they sent it back in time to him, so does that mean time's a closed loop and it can create its own self, like the Escher drawing, people drawing on their own hands?
Jesus Christ.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And yes,
because
you're correct, I think.
Okay, so if that's true, then yes, he's maybe the villain, except for he saves the day, potentially, because how do we know how bad the future really is? Because we haven't made it there yet. We just have their word that the world needs to be destroyed.
Well, you
just have to look outside your window and realize, maybe all these movies about our inability to change and being the authors of our own destruction, they always come with, you know what? They got a point. Thanos in the Avengers movies, dude kind of has a point, That's what makes for great villains that we don't ever see in this movie.
And this is if you take and to your point, Thomas, in order to take my hypothetical seriously, you have to assume that everything that we're told in the movie is true. The people in the future are that bad off and they have tried everything. And this is there. If you take all that as being true, then this is like the ultimate of what you're saying, Ken. This is like to my mind, if the continuation of the species is our central motivator as individuals, then the protagonist is like the worst villain in history. Because it should be of utmost important that the race continues.
But here's the other part to that. If everything's fixed in that time loop and everything has to happen the way that it has to happen, then he has to happen the way that he happens, and there's no changing it. So he doesn't have agency at all. So how do you call him an evil person? Because that's the thing that the presumption is that what you just said is not true, Thomas, that it isn't a closed loop, that free will, that time is so localized that you do have free will. There is no... So the future might not have happened. The future where things go bad might not have happened because people choose not to have that happen because they know that it could. Yeah, it just gets a little too hypothetical for me, I guess. Especially when you're basing it on the film, right? Like, if your question is, should we save the planet or all die? I guess I would go with probably save the planet. Does that mean that if everybody has to die to save the planet, then I'm probably for I don't know. I don't know where to go. I don't really want to die so the planet's alive.
Yeah, these are all I think you brought up fantastic points that I just haven't thought deeply enough about all this business I'm regurgitating to respond to.
So what if there was a technology right now and they're like, we could move back, invert X number of people, destroy the past, and we're going to go back to like the 1860s when we haven't been over industrialized, we hadn't fucked everything up, and you got that winning ticket that you were going to be part of that incursion.
Yeah. Fuck yeah.
I mean, would you? Yeah, you would?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even though it would mean it would destroy everything that happened after the moment you end up in 1863 and you stop the Civil War or whatever you do.
Yeah.
You'd be for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thomas?
No, I wouldn't do that because I have no idea that wouldn't be worse.
Yeah. Or that we might be the actual result of that already having happened.
Also a good point, Ken.
Fortunately, I mean, I think that what's interesting about the film is the film takes that seriously, whereas which is a interesting thing to fight against, right? Like the world could be undone, and it could be undone in a way that's even beyond like nuclear, because the idea is I think it's smart to have it have radiation, so that you have the origin story of cleaning up the radioactive mess, and you get Oppenheimer mentioned, shout out, but you also get the idea of nuclear war, and it's no, this is worse. This is worse than us just destroying ourselves. This is destroying everything.
I think he refers to it as a nuclear holocaust. And she says, no, it's even worse.
She's ironically, someone in a different podcast I listened to talking about this movie pointed out, she's ironically probably the person who founded this scientific line of inquiry that leads to the future tech that allows them to invert time and do all this business.
Who's the she in this?
The researcher who tells him it's worse than a nuclear holocaust.
Oh, okay.
That he meets at the beginning. And something that occurred to me just on this last viewing, I think, and this would require you'd need to go to the script, I think, to prove this out if you really wanted to put the merits to it. But I think that the protagonist realizes throughout the course of the movie, at the end of the movie, we find out that he's running the operation, right? I think actually during the course of the movie, he's realizing that he could, if he wanted to, be the boss of this whole thing. It's not like future him had this plan all along to become the chief. It's over the course of this operation, he's realizing hey, no one who knows what's going on really knows what they're doing. I'm going to be the guy. And I'm going to do this. What we see in Tenet is the setup so that he can be the head.
Yeah. And I think the impossibility of that working also with Patterson is why we would never get the sequel, right? That's going to get so opaque, so the end of Primer, trying to understand what happens, it's just going to go off the rails. So I think it's a smart place that it stops the way that it does. But you see that competency throughout in him, and I think that makes a lot of sense. That he's in the future, but as he's getting there, it's not like he's at the end point and then realizes that he can go back and do all this. I think, like you said, the end of the movie is him understanding, oh yeah, I'm actually in charge. So I think it's definitely there. I think the great thing about the film though is you just get these things where Patterson, they run each other for 3 minutes on screen, and they're trying to figure out how to get into the impregnable arms dealer place, and he's like, "Oh, I have an idea. You're not going to like it," and it just cuts, right?
Yeah,
and it's yeah, of course, that's or when Washington walks into the brunch place to meet Kane. And he's just he's not affected by the maitre d'. He's oh no, you can just give me what he's having. I don't need the waiter. And just the suaveness and the riz is just there, right?
Yeah, he definitely has swagger.
I love when he asks him if he can pack it up to go.
Yeah, he's like, certainly not. Yeah.
Certainly not.
Do you guys think another galaxy brain theory, this one from, the internet, is Robert Pattinson Elizabeth Debicki's son?
Whoa.
What the fuck?
That could be.
No, his name is Neil,
is that
and
why
her son's
Robert...
name is Max.
Doesn't matter. He can change it. His name might be Max
he changed
Neil.
his name to... Is that why Robert Pattinson's hair is blonde? So that he can... obviously, Nolan also likes a good stand-in, so that the blondness helps, but dyeing Pattinson's hair blonde plus casting, gigantus blonde Dubecki, maybe Neil is Max.
Maybe if Pattinson was a little taller. And are you implying that Sir Christopher Nolan physically dyed Robert Pattinson's hair himself?
Yeah, well, yeah,
he's a hands-on director.
Yeah,
wouldn't surprise me.
He and Lady Emma had Robert over for some screenings, and they ate popcorn and dyed hair. And something that reminds me, my father to this day swears it never happened, but there was a period in the late 80s where highlighting hair with blonde streaks was really popular, and my mom, my dad, and my grandma would all Knots Landing was on Thursday nights, and my grandma would come over and they'd all watch Knots Landing and dye each other's hair, highlight each other's hair.
Okay. Well, anytime you start a story with my dad denies this happened.
So I just imagine
I'm bracing for something terrible.
Every time Jack tells me that, I just lean in. I'm like, no, come on.
Go on.
He was supposed to be on this episode, but
he was. So Jack did get to see the screening of Tenet last night. He did text me his take on it, if you want me to read it in Jack's voice.
Yeah.
Okay. My take on Tenet is that I can still pretty much follow the movie until the Kenneth Branagh switching back forth scene, at which point it completely loses me, and I have no idea what the fuck is happening the rest of the time. Great movie, though.
Man, yeah, he sounds different ever since he started working for Joe Rogan and came back from France.
I should have done it with a French accent. Shit. So, Robert Pattinson, every time he plays a British character, he doesn't use his own accent. He uses a different British accent.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh,
he's a weirdo. He is a true character. I love Robert Pattinson. I hope nothing ever comes out that makes him a creepo or anything, because he is a legitimate eccentric working at the highest level of film with some of the biggest directors. It's great.
Oh, yeah, he's amazing. Have you guys seen The Heron? The bird and the boy in the heron, the Miyazaki movie?
No.
He does he has a role that's kind of similar to his role in Tenet. He does the voice acting in the American version, and it is just totally bananas, just completely insane, unhinged, but very, very worthwhile. He's a great man.
I have heard that the follow-up for the director of Parasite, the movie starring Pattinson, Mickey 17, has been completed for months, and they just pushed it back to January of next year. And this is presumably, someone who has seen it said Pattinson uses a Joe Pesci type voice throughout the entire movie.
Oh.
Oh, he's so great. I love that guy. Everything
Does that make you want to see it more or less?
Oh, more, yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Everything that people like about Joaquin Phoenix is how I feel about Pattinson. I have a real hard time with Joaquin, but I get Pattinson's in. The sweatier Pattinson gets, the more I lean in, the more excited I get.
I think he took all that fame from the Twilight movies and parlayed it into doing a lot of indie films, a lot of interesting directors, and that got him on board with like big time directors like Christopher Nolan who want to work with him.
Yeah, I think he and Kristen Stewart are the best of their generation. I think they make the most interesting. Good or bad, they don't make boring shit. Like, they just make cool shit.
Yeah, I'll go along with that. She was a vampire. He was a vampire. They had a vampire baby.
They say no friends at dusk to each other.
Uh-huh.
Is that their code word?
Yep, and they enfold their hands or entwine their hands. Is it enfold or entwine?
Interlace their fingers?
Tenet. Okay. Are you making a church with your hand there? I'm not sure what you're doing there, buddy.
Shout out to Martin Donovan, man. Get to see that guy again. I love that guy. That guy was so good in the 90s, and then he just disappeared.
Oh, you know what? I was thinking the same thing both times I saw this, and then it's sad to realize that he doesn't appear in the rest of the movie. He's like the American exposition guy, just like Michael Caine. It's like
until you feel that heat, but just the most beautiful line delivery in motion pictures. We all think we would run into the burning building, but until you feel that heat.
I couldn't take my eyes off of Kick-Ass in this. The Tenet guy, the guy who's in charge of the military operation, Aaron Taylor Johnson.
The next James Bond, the next real
James Bond. Is that Aaron Taylor Johnson?
Yeah,
as the kind of RAF military leader in a James Bond movie. It's like, okay, and then James Bond, he get together, and James Bond does his own little thing, and then the whole military guys come in. Yeah, very reminiscent.
Did I miss something in this last viewing? How do they have a ship that has the turnstiles in it?
Shh.
Okay.
The ships are turnstiles.
Question answered. Thank you.
Whoa. That opens up a whole can of worms I don't want to get into.
But yeah, that's why they hang out at that part of the ocean, because I still am unclear if that part of the ocean is somehow permanently inverted or it's just the boats that are there.
But half of them are inverted and half of them are okay. Never mind. I was just making sure I didn't miss something. I think this movie helps, especially when you know that the forward and backwards fight scenes, but even like the fight scene in the kitchen, which is great. There's something that my wife said to me is that we've been watching some ballet, and she's like, "Oh, fight scene." It was after watching John Wick 3 or something. She's like, "Oh, fight scenes are just ballet for men."
Yes.
I was like, yeah, that's great. Yeah, exactly. It's amazing to see these guys go at it this way, and it's all a dance.
And I guess we'll talk about this as we get further into Nolan's filmography, but Batman Begins was heavily criticized by nerds as the fight scenes not being very well shot or edited. How far and how hard Nolan actually worked to improve that part of his filmmaking skills, to where in Tenet, I mean, it's very clear action, despite the fact part of it's going backwards and forwards. Amazing job at taking some criticism and turning it into a strength.
Yeah.
I still personally think he's weak at the gunfight type action. The big stunts and the hand-to-hand I think he's really good at, but I still have a hard time following the battle scenes that are at the end of like Tenet and Inception and stuff. That could be a personal problem.
Joel Schumacher got the same feedback on his Batman entries, and so he upped it for 8mm at the end, that fight scene. So yeah, kudos.
Kudos to Schumacher and Nolan, two guys who, if you squint hard enough, exactly the same.
So if you dudes humor me for a sec and consider the idea that Tenet is called Tenet to bracket these 10 films that start with Memento and end with Tenet. So I've been trying to think about, besides the time issues, what other things might unify these films. And they're all kind of, one thing that it may be is they're all kind of genre films, like fairly pulpy starter material that he like then imbues with these crazy psychological, concepts, philosophical or scientific, etc. And Oppenheimer is much more, Oppenheimer's a capital D drama. And when I watch Tenet, when I watch Inception, something that I struggle with is like, these ideas are so cool. Is he wasting them on action movies? And is Oppenheimer maybe his first step out of genre so that he can just deal with the subjects? I guess I'm rambling, but what do you guys think? Do you ever feel like the action inhibits the thought? Would you rather see him make a Lynch type movie or something like that and just go deep into these ideas? Or what do you think about that?
No. I think what one thing I have loved about Nolan is people like to compare him. Oh, he wants to be Kubrick. He wants to be Michael Mann. But at this point in his career, he's just Christopher Nolan. He likes pulpy genre, and he likes having weird ideas that he could slip in there and make these big movies that a lot of people enjoy. And I think something like Dunkirk and Oppenheimer are another part of his so-called wheelhouse, where he's deeply interested in stuff that happened in history and also applying his thematic and structural and narrative ideas he's been honing onto those subjects. And I would bet a whole dollar that his next film will be something more in the genre stuff that he's done previously, because Oppenheimer's pretty heavy shit, and we know he likes Fast and Furious movies. There's that scene in Tenet, the car chase, which is better and more practical than any car chase in the last 5 Fast and Furious movies. But it's going to be something like The Prisoner, or I know they've been talking about The Prisoner a lot. He had almost made that a couple times.
Yeah, that was
based off of the Patrick McGowan series?
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I would love to see that. No, do you think? I mean, I thought maybe we were going to ask if this was like Tenet was why he went to director jail and had to make Oppenheimer to get back out of it, because Tenet didn't do well financially.
Well, I do think yes. I don't know if we want to talk about his reaction to Warner Brothers and COVID and all that stuff, but I don't think he was in director jail. But I think he intentionally went to Universal with the most unimpeachable, down the middle play he could think of, which was a biopic of this historical figure. You know,
I don't think that was a play. I think that's not a really commercial prospect. Oppenheimer cost $100 million. It was not a sure thing. But yeah, he was awfully pissed off at Warner's for releasing this to HBO Max, or whatever it was called at the time. Now it's just called Max, named after the kid in Tenet. And he was super, super pissed. Villeneuve was super pissed. And they appeased Villeneuve with the first Dune. But Nolan never got over that. And
it's also because Villeneuve he wanted his movie to come out in the theater. Nolan wanted his movie to come out in the theater, and it had to come out in the summer of 2020. He would not entertain the idea of delaying its release. And this is a different kind of podcast, but that is wild to me.
Well, no, I mean, what happened was,
from a health point of view.
Earlier than that, though, HBO/Warner Brothers decided to release their entire 2020 slate on their struggling streaming platform, and then they would not budge for Nolan. And then because of that, blew up in their face, and Nolan's like, "Well, fine, I'm taking my shit and going to another studio." That's one of the reasons they kind of capitulated a bit to Villeneuve and Dune.
But they did budge for Nolan. Nolan's movie didn't come out on streaming.
Yeah, it did. That's where I saw it. And it was also released in theaters, and it didn't make very much money because it was also available to watch at home.
It didn't make very much money because there was a pandemic.
I know. And one of the things watching this movie I was thinking of is this would, in pre or post-pandemic times, been a great conversation piece that everybody would have eventually gone and seen and had discussions about, much like Inception. Maybe not pre-pandemic, because we were kind of stuck in that Marvel Cinematic Universe cinematic lull, but definitely post-pandemic. I think this would have been a great movie to see in theaters.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the crazy things about there were so many ways to both release more movies during the pandemic safely and make boffo box office by celebrating a return to the movies more, in my opinion, including like letting Tenet play IMAX for 4 months in 2020, late 2021, early 2022.
Well, shit, Paramount held on to Top Gun Maverick to release once everything was open, and that only made $1 billion.
Yeah, imagine if that summer was just like Tenet, Mission Impossible, like all the big Spielberg movies. Like you just celebrated 100 years of movies,
or
by putting the best shit imaginable back in theaters.
Or did you cut the baby in half? I mean, I guess that might be the other fear as well, right? If you stacked
Mother?
everything up, if you stacked everything up, though, then people, I think Barbenheimer was an interesting phenomena because I don't think a lot of people want to go see 2 movies within a short span of time. I think it's more of I think the cadence isn't there for most film goers these days.
I think this is very, a counter. This is a trollish thing to say, maybe, but I think the way people go to the cinema is 100% due to the content that's available and not. I think people love going to the movies. Proven by Barbenheimer. I think we could have that once a month if they just made good movies again. But that's we're not, there's no way to argue against that. So something that occurred to me, Ken, when you were saying that Tenet, that Nolan actually has exactly the career he wants, which I'll admit, I think a lot of critics and even myself maybe have never truly entertained that notion. So he is really the true fusion then of like there are all these directors of his generation that we say like are some combo of Spielberg and Kubrick, but he is maybe the true 50-50 one because he loves his pulp and he loves his big ideas and he is not going to compromise either of those visions for you. He's going to give you the crazy ass spy action movie that also has this mind-blowing idea of time right in the middle, and you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah, but other I think Dunkirk maybe is maybe the one movie that sits outside of this conversation, but I think he really wants to make a movie and he is thinking about the eventual audience, not like specific people, but a general audience, and he's trying to make their time that they spend with his movies worthwhile and to see something they hadn't seen before. And there's a showman quality to him that when you mix it with his adherence to like film, shooting on IMAX, not going digital, there's not one green screen scene in the entirety of Tenet, which is amazing, especially given that ending. He's a weird combo, you're right, of all these things, and you can't really Frankenstein him from other filmmakers because by this point, it's just Christopher Nolan in a Christopher Nolan movie. Sir Christopher Nolan.
Yeah. Something else that what you're saying made me think of, if I can remember what I was. Fudge. No, I lost it. Sorry.
Okay. You'll remember it in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
You're moving back towards it. Put your mask on. The thought will come back.
Or just
I do
exhale.
remember actually. So there's that other quite popular podcast that did a Nolan series that Thomas and I both listened to. And one of their insights, one of the two friends' insights that I think you said something similar to just now, Ken, is that Nolan's great trick actually is not that when he first started with Memento and the first several movies, it's like, oh, this guy is so smart and these movies are so sophisticated. And I think that's true, but I also think something that the two friends said is true, which is that what separates him out from a Kubrick or a Lynch or someone, or even a Villeneuve sometimes, who's just so brainy all the time, is Nolan's movies are just smart enough that the audience can follow along and then feel smart themselves when they put it all together at the end. When the prestige happens, when he reveals the grand mechanic that has been operative in the film the whole time, everybody walks out knowing what it was and understanding it and feeling like, oh, I can't believe that's so smart, And making, to your point about him being a showman, making the audience feel smart is so much a part of his appeal, is that he gives you a good time and he makes you feel like a brainiac for figuring it out.
Yeah, I mean, there are like people who are nerdy cineasts that do podcasts, those fucking guys. And then there are people who just go see a movie for a good time. And the ability to appeal to what works for both of those types of people, you're right. It is kind of a trick, kind of a magic trick.
Yeah. There's, what's interesting about going the way that, or having the hindsight that we do now, is that if we were just looking at Nolan's trajectory from Following and Memento, people at the time were trying to compare him to Alfred Hitchcock.
Very
And-
much so, yeah.
And so it's interesting that once he gets Batman, then that's no longer the comparison.
Yeah.
I guess the other, I had another thought there about combining those two, but yeah, it's an interesting, he has a very interesting career that was the other thing, is that people were asking like, well, did you shoot, I think it was in an interview that might be on the DVD of Memento. It was like a 30-minute interview. He didn't do commentary on Memento because people were afraid. His brother said like, don't, because you'll tell people what they should believe happens in the film, and that's not a good thing, because they should have their own interpretation, because all of your actors have their own idea of like what exactly is or isn't. And if you listen to our episode, listener, like you'll have a sense that Ryan and I might think things might be slightly different. Like we're like 98% agree, and then like there's a little bit of daylight, which is the fun thing to talk about, right?
Yeah.
Just like this movie would have been the fun thing to talk about. So the idea there was that asked him like, oh, did you make this film so that people would have to watch it twice, and in that way you get twice the box office? And he said, no, I made it because like that's the way my brain works. I think it's interesting, but I do think people should watch this twice. And it would be great if he added the bit from Schizopolis where he's like, and pay full retail price.
Yes. No matinees. Yes, I thought of that as soon as you started talking about that, Thomas. That's funny. That is one of I love that you guys dig so much into the context, Thomas, and that you read about the making of these films and watch the background featurettes and dig into the source material or these books looking at the careers. Because that makes me feel free to not do any of that stuff, because I do think it's interesting to see, I try and just react to the movie cold, and you come in with all this context, and I love exploring those differences and how we come out.
Yeah, we all liked it.
Yeah. 10 out of 10.
Oh boy. So that I guess that ends our Memento and Tenet pairing. What a fantastic, this temporal pincer movement with Nolan and with Aronofsky previously is just yielding a lot of interesting parallels. It's almost like his entire career, you have these parallel storylines.
That's exactly what I'm hoping watching, and I may just be proven false or silly, but thinking of these 10 movies together, I'm hoping to uncover stuff like that. Like, is he intentionally bracketing these 10 films? And if so, why? Why does he think about them that way? So
that sounds like a Quentin Tarantino thing. I don't know if Nolan thinks that way.
And you could be right. Like I said, it could be hogwash. The Tenet thing may have no bearing. Incidentally, this does make me ask a question about nitpicks about Tenet, though. So Sator, all of the those brilliant tax shelter things that they have at the airports are run by Rotas Security, which is just Sator spelled background, and yet the protagonist never seems to realize that Sator actually owns all of these facilities that they're talking about.
If you want to continue this journey with us, next week we'll be covering Insomnia, and that's going to get paired with Dunkirk.
The only two of his films that I've only seen each of those films once, and every other movie of him I've seen multiple times, so it'll be exciting for me to revisit these.
Oh, well, if please join us if you want Ryan's enthusiasm to infect you.
You can also follow us on the social medias. Typically, we say we're on all the majors like Civic, Race Car, Evil Olive, Noon, Radar, Refer. That's just not referred, it's refer, so it's still a palindrome. Deed, Repaper. Was that a cat I saw? Dr. Awkward. We're not on Dusk, so don't find us because we have no friends at Dusk.
Thank you, Ryan, for the theme song. We didn't even discuss the music here. That didn't go with Zimmer. It's a great score. in Tenet. I'm sorry we didn't get to discuss that more, but Ryan's also a musician and did a great job with our theme song.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, let's listen to the outro here in just a moment. Okay, I'm putting the vinyl down, putting the needle on. Okay, thanks, guys.
That makes us together.
Thank you.
Together, that makes us flash gorgeous.
Flash gorgeous.
I'm not talking at you. I'm talking to you.
Flash gorgeous.
I don't want to hear about you. I want to hear from you.
It's 10-4.
10-4, buddies. Destroy. Kill all hippies.
I don't hate it. I just don't know why you strayed from the formula.
You bastard! You don't know it, Bob. I'm an artist. And I must reflect that in my rhyme.
So what is he? It doesn't matter.
Fudge.
Fuck was about to direct Star Trek 9. You're right.
Fudge.